Hello, so hopefully you've done all of the tasks in the previous video, tasks 1. They were a nice introduction to using Scratch and just doing very basic things, becoming familiar with the blocks in Scratch. Now we're moving on to something called variables. Now these are really powerful things and they can make your games or your programs much more interesting using variables. So we need to understand first what a variable is. So you might have heard the word before in maybe a science lesson where you use dependent and independent variables. If not, then you'll come on to that later on in school. But to explain what a variable is in terms of computer science and in terms of programming, then a variable is something that stores data in our program. So it's like a box, and the box has a label on it. So the label on this box is name. So I've called the variable name. And then inside the box, I can store anything, but it makes sense to only store names inside the box. So the example here is I've stored Bob in my box, and Bob is a name. It makes sense. Now, I can store anything I want in this box, but if I stored the word, or if I stored a number in the box, if I stored 5, now because 5 isn't a name, it's probably not a good idea to store 5 in the box. So it makes sense. You need to think about what's going to be stored in your box. So what data are you storing? Are you storing a name? Are you storing a score? And then give the variable an appropriate name based on that. So a name that makes sense. Okay, so this one, I've called my variable name, and inside the variable I am storing the name Bob. I could store Luke. I could store Casey. Okay, but it makes most sense to put names in this box. If I have a different box, however, and this one is called score, then now it doesn't make sense to put Luke or Bob in this box, because Luke and Bob are not a score. If I asked you, what's your high score in that game, and you said it's Bob, that doesn't make much sense. So in here, we're storing a score, and this value can keep changing whilst we're playing our game. Every time we get a point, we want that score to update, to go up. Okay, so we need a variable in order to keep track of our score. So think of variables like boxes with a label on the front of them, and you store appropriate data inside the box. Okay, so for this task, now these tasks aren't the easiest, especially if you're not familiar with Scratch or using variables. Maybe it'll be worth me going through task 2.1 with you, and then you guys trying the rest of the tasks, and then seeing the solutions afterwards. So task 2.1. We need to store your name in a variable called name. Okay, so just like that box we had earlier, and store your age in a variable named age. So we've got a variable for name and a variable for age. And then we need to get the character to say the following sentence. My name is whatever the name is, and my age is whatever the age is. In 2 years, I will be age plus 2. So, where these brackets are, these angular brackets, these are the variables. So depending on what you store in your variable, it should change based on that. So it shouldn't always say Luke. If I change the name to Bob, it should say Bob instead. Okay, so you can't just write name. You can't just write your name in there and your age in there. We need to do something else. And to do this in Scratch, if we want to say a few different things of text, so we've got my name is, then we've got a variable, then we've got and my age is, and another variable, and then we've got some more text, in 2 years I will be, and then we've got a last variable, age plus 2. So to actually combine these different parts in one sentence, you have to use what's called a join block. So this example here is joining the words apple and banana. So the character will say apple, banana. Okay, that's how you join two things. If you want to join more than two things, you have to use more than one join block. So let's show you how you do that. But first of all, we want to look at the flowchart for this. So if I find the flowchart, So this is what our program will look like. We want to start probably when the green flag is clicked. Store the name. So we need to create a variable and store our name in the variable. Create a variable called age and store our age in the variable. And then at the end, we want the character to say, my name is name and my age is age, and so on. And then we end. So how do we do this in Scratch? So the first thing was start when the green flag is clicked. So we need a green flag block. Okay, and then the next step, we need to create our variables. So to create a variable in Scratch, if you look down here on the left, you've got the variables blocks, and I've already made one called my variable. But we want to create one called name first of all. So you click on make a variable, this button here, and this box appears. And we want this variable to be called name because we're going to be storing our name in it. So it's like a box with the variable with the name variable on the front. And when we name variables, we usually use a lowercase letter for the first letter. So we don't use capitals at the start of a variable name. That's just a good programming tip. Okay, so now I've created a name variable. So you'll see it's here on the left, and because the tick is there, it's actually showing on the screen already. And the value in it is 0. So by default, it starts off at 0. Now it doesn't make sense to have a name which has 0 stored in the box. So we need to set it to be our name at the start. So when the green flag is clicked, the next block was to store or set. Now we don't want to set my variable, we want to set name. So you click on the drop down arrow, click on name, and we set the name to whatever your name is. So I'll put my name in. And now in my program, when this green flag is clicked, if I click the green flag, it stores my name in the box. Whenever I change this, it'll change every time I press the green flag. Okay, so that's the first block. We've stored name. We also need to have a variable called age. So remember, how do we make a variable? Well, we need to click on make a variable up here on the left. Type in age. So it's got a different label on this box, a different box with a different name on it, or a different label on it. And now we've got age. And the next thing we do is we set the age to whatever our age is. So I'm very old at 27. And if I click the green flag, it'll now set the name to Luke and set the age to 27. So we've got our variables and there's data stored inside the variables. What do we do next? Oh, wrong tab. Now we want the character to say this sentence. Now this part isn't easy, so watch along, because you need to use a lot of join blocks to get this to work. Well, I'll show you two ways of doing it actually. No, we will use one say block. Okay. So, what do I want to join together? I've got my name is, so that's one bit of text. I'm going to count these. My name is, and then I've got a variable called name. So that's two things I want to put in this sentence. Then I've got and my age is, so that's 3, plus the age, so that's 4 different parts. And then I've got in 2 years I will be, so some text there, so that's 5. And lastly, I want to say age plus 2, the variable. So that is 6 different parts to this sentence. Now when we use a join block, this joins two things together. If I want, so I can put one thing in here and one thing in here. If I want 3 things, I can stick another join block inside. So now I got 3 blocks. Now I wanted 6. So I'm actually going to need altogether 5 join blocks inside each other. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need one more. Okay, so having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 join blocks stuck inside each other gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different places I can put in parts of the sentence. Now, I don't want the character saying apple, banana, 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 banana. The first part of the sentence was my name is. So in the first box, my name is. And I don't want it to say banana. I want it to say whatever is stored in my variable name. If I typed in Luke here, then if I change my variable, it'll never actually change what's being said. It'll always say Luke because that's what I've typed here. So instead, what you need to do is use your variable block. So remember, we had my name is and whatever the variable name is. So you get the name block of your variable in variables there, and you put that in there. So now it says my name is and whatever your name is. Now a little tip, this will join together, but it won't put spaces in between. So if you want a space in between, at the end of your sentence here, you put a space there. So see how that gets a bit bigger there? That'll make sure there's a space before it says the name. And then what comes next in our sentence? So we've done my name is, and we put the name variable. Now we want and my age is. And my age is, again, put a space at the end and at the start here because you want a space afterwards, after the name there. My age is, and we put age in. This last part, so we can put a full stop to finish that sentence. In 2 years, I will be. Put a space after it. Now this one is a bit different because we want age plus 2. Now we don't have a variable called age plus 2, but what we can do is instead of just putting age in here, we can put in a sum. We can do age plus 2. And then drag this whole thing. Remember, so the left-hand side fits in. There. And so that isn't a nice thing to build up. It's quite difficult to do in Scratch. We have to put lots of join blocks together. And then we split up the sentence. We've got some text, then a variable, then some more text, then a variable, and then some more text again. And then this variable, we had to add 2 to it. Okay, and now if you click on the very left, the leftmost block, drag it into, so the left-hand side fits into where it says say, and now the character will say that whole sentence for 2 seconds. If you want to make it longer, you can change it to 5 seconds or whatever you want. So now when the green flag is clicked, he says, my name is whatever is stored in name, and in our program, it's Luke. And my age is whatever is stored in age, so it's 27. So if you have your own name and age in here, the program will be different based on those. So I click go. He says, my name is Luke and my age is 27. In 2 years, I will be 29. Okay, and yours would have said whatever you've put into name and age. So that last part isn't nice. It's task 2.1, but hopefully it gives you a feeling of how you use join blocks and how you use variables. Now I want you to try probably a slightly easier task, which is task 2.2. So let's go back to the task. So I want you to imagine you are running a tuck shop. Each sweet you sell costs £2. Write a program that asks the person using your program to enter a number of sweets and then shows them the total cost of the sweets. So you may want your program to do something like this. So the character should ask a question, how many sweets do you want? And then it should calculate the total amount and tell them the total price is whatever the answer is. Okay, so think about what variables you would need. So probably sweets and price. What are the price of the sweets? And then at the end, you need to calculate them. How would you calculate the total price if you know how many sweets they've got and what the price for each sweet is? Okay, I'll give you a hint as well for this part. You'll need to use an ask block. So an ask block is in sensing. It looks like this. By default, it says what's your name? And then if I wanted the answer to that question, I'd use this blue answer block. So to give you an example, if I wanted to ask what's your name, and then I wanted to store that as a variable name, then I can put this answer block in here. So whatever I ask, what's your name, whatever the answer to this question is, will be stored in my variable name. So if I show you, what's your name? If I put Bob, if you look at the name variable up here, and I press enter, now Bob is stored in name. I asked the question, and I stored the answer to that question in the variable name. So you want to use an ask and an answer block in order to do this task. Okay, that's the task there. Have a go at it. Try to do it yourself, and if you can't quite do it, then I'll show you how to do it anyway. So pause this video now, and then I'll show you how to do it later. Okay, so if I wanted to do this task, again, we've got a flowchart for it somewhere, if I can find that. So 2.2. So these are the steps for the program. It's always nice to have a flowchart to show you what you want to do step by step. So when we click the green flag, I want to store in a variable the price. Okay, and so that I know what the price of the sweets is. So we'll start with that. Before we do anything, I want to have a variable called price. So I need a variable, make a new variable, call it price. And then we set the price to, well, it's £2. So I'll just put 2 in. Okay, make sure you only put a number in there. If you put numbers and words, then it won't quite work in the same way. And then the next step, I want to ask, how many sweets do you want? So remember, the ask block is in sensing. Ask, what's your name? No, we want to know how many sweets do you want? And then if I want to store that number, so I've called it number here. So I need another variable called number. You could call it number of sweets to make it more clear. And then I set the number to whatever they have typed in, whatever their answer was to that question. And now I need to calculate the total cost. So you could do this within the say block, or we could make a new variable called cost, which is what I'm going to do now. So make a variable, call it the cost or the total. I'm going to call it cost. Good, so we've got another variable called cost. And then I want to set my cost to be the calculation. Now, how do we calculate the total cost? So it's the amount of sweets multiplied by the price. If I've got 10 sweets and they all cost £2, then it should be 10 times 2 for the total cost, which will give me £20. So I need to multiply. So if I go to the operators, find the multiply block, and then what do I multiply together? Now, you might think you can put in the number, and that's fine. How many sweets times, well, the price is always 2, so why not put 2 here? Well, the reason we wouldn't do that is, what if later on you decide you want to change how much your sweets cost? Then you'd have to change this number every time. Okay, you'd have to change it to 5, and then you'd have to change it to 6 if you wanted to update the price again. But what we do is, because we've set the price at the top, we use the price block, the price variable. So then you only have to change this number up here. No matter what this is, it'll always update because you're using the price variable. Okay, so this calculates the cost. And then we just need to do the last part, which is to say the total cost. And because we've got a bit of text and then a variable, we need to use a join block. So we want to say, in looks, say, and what we want to say is the total cost is, we can put a pound sign to make it look more official. And afterwards, in the second place, we want to give the cost, which is this variable cost. And we can put this into the hello block, into the say block, sorry. And now we've completed the task. So if we put it to 5 seconds. So when the green flag is clicked, we set the price to £2. Well, it's just 2. How many sweets do you want? We ask them. And then the person using the program answers. So whatever their answer is, it'll work out the cost for them. It does. The cost is equals to the number times by the price. And then we say the total cost is whatever the cost is. So I click play. How many sweets do we want? Well, if I put in 10, I know that the answer should be 20, because 10 times 2 is 20, and it says the total cost is £20. If I redid it again, I put in 5, I know that the cost will be £10. So enter, the cost is £10. So you can put in whatever value you want, and it'll work out the cost, no matter what. Okay, so that is task 2.2. So now we've gone to task 2.3. So this time, a shop is finding it tough to count how many apples they have left. Write a program to help them work out how many they have. Your program should ask how many packs they have, ask how many apples are in each pack, and say how many apples they have in total. So it's very similar to the last task, except now you're asking 2 questions. You're asking how many packs they have, and you're asking how many apples are in each pack. So I'll show you the flowchart just to give you a hint on this one. So 2.3. So let me zoom in a bit actually. So this time when we start, we ask how many packs they have and we store it. We ask how many apples are in each pack and we store that. And then we calculate the total and output it. Okay, have a go at this task. It's not too dissimilar to the last one. And then pause the video here and then come back to me. Okay, so I'm just going to rearrange the code from the last one, I think. If you want to delete variables, by the way, because I've got quite a lot left over now, I don't want these variables. What you need to do is, if I just delete these blocks actually, right click on the variable you want to get rid of. So I don't need age. Right click and then click delete. So let's get rid of all these variables that we don't need. We don't even need the my variable. If you get rid of them all, you'll see that the blocks disappear. So you need to actually have a variable for those blocks to appear. So the first one I need is how many packs do they have? So I'm going to call it packs. How many packs of apples? I need to ask them how many packs they have. So I'm just going to put how many packs. And then I set packs to whatever their answer is. So remember, use the blue answer block. Okay, and the next step was to ask how many apples are in each pack. So I ask again, how many apples are in each pack? And I do the same thing, but this time I want to store this in a variable called apples. So I make a variable, I call it apples, and I set apples to the answer. So the answer always takes whatever the last question, the answer to the last question that was asked. So it won't remember this one anymore. That's why I'm storing them in variables. I've stored apples. Now I need to calculate the total. So how do we calculate the total amount? Well, we've got a certain amount of packs, and in every one of those packs, we've got a certain amount of apples. So to find out the total amount of apples, we will need to multiply them together. And we need to store it then in a variable called total. So you make a new variable, call it total, and we set the total to be, remember I said we need to multiply the number of packs with how many are in each pack. So total to packs, so our variable packs, how many packs we have, multiplied by how many apples are in each pack. So apples. And that works out the total. And remember, when we want to display to the screen, if I want the character to say it, he's going to be saying, you have something, a variable, apples. Now, how many different parts are there to this sentence? So we have you have is text, then we have a variable, so that's 2, and then we have more text. So we'll need 3 spaces for our sentence. So remember how the join blocks work? This gives me 2 spaces for a sentence, but we need 3. So we need to put another one inside to get 3 spaces. And in here we have you have, put a space after the have, total, so the total amount of apples. Then we start the next part with a space, and we put apples. So it says you have whatever our total is, apples. Stick it into the say block, and that code should work. So let's test it out. How many packs? So let's test your times tables. If I do 6 packs and 8 apples, how many should that give me? Okay, let's see if you're right. 6 packs. There's 8 apples in every pack. Then we should do 6 times 8, and it gives me 48 apples. Okay, and that works with any numbers. If I have 5 packs, there's 10 packs in each, then it should be 50 apples, and you have 50 apples. So that's task 2.3, and the last one is a challenge task, because I haven't broken it down very much. It's quite a tricky wording. Have a go without me reading this out to you. See if you understand the question. Most important thing is, if all of your friends collect the same amount as each other, but not necessarily the same amount as you, so you'll need to ask them how many they collected each. They all collected the same amount, so maybe they all collected 4, maybe they all collected 6, but you don't know until you ask them. Have a go, and then pause the video here and come back to me once you're done. Okay, so if you look at the flowchart from this one. So we know that you collected 8 pine cones. In the question it says, you walk with 4 of your friends, you collect 8 pine cones, and they all collect the same amount, but you don't know how many it was. So first thing we do is we can store how many pine cones you got. So your pine cones is stored as 8. Then we need to ask your friends, how many did they get? And you store how many pine cones they got each. Then we can calculate the total amount and say what the answer is. So I'll get rid of this code. Let's get rid of the variables. Delete, right click and delete. I can keep total because I actually want to use a variable called total later on. So First variable, I'm going to name it your pine cones. It's how many pine cones you collected. Now notice I'm writing this in a weird way. So when you write variables, it's usually a good idea to write them like this. You start off with the first word, and remember I said you never start with a capital letter. And then any new words that you put in, you put a capital letter for it. Now, is pine cone one word or two words? I don't know. But I'm going to write it like this. So every new word, you put a capital letter. Okay, so I've got a variable called your pine cones. And the first thing I do in my program is I set that to be 8, because you collected 8. Then you need to ask your friends how many do they collect each. Now it says in the question they all collected the same amount, but we don't know how many it was. So we need to ask them how many did they collect. So, how many did your friends collect each? So we need to have a variable to store that as well. So maybe we'll call it their pine cones. Okay, so we've got a variable called your pine cones and a variable called their pine cones. After we ask them, we can set their pine cones to be the answer. So however many that person or that friend says they collected each, it'll be stored in variables. And now the last thing to do is we need to calculate what the total amount is. So how would we do that? We know that we have 4 friends. Okay, and each of them collected, well, however many they say, pine cones. Now one thing I didn't put in here is we could have put a variable for how many friends you have, because then you could change it. But the question for now says 4 friends. Maybe we should set it as a variable actually. Okay, I'm gonna change this task as I do it. I need a variable called friends, so we know how many friends you have. Okay, and we set friends at the start to 4. So I'm setting pine cones to 8 because I always collect 8, and how many friends I have is 4. Then I ask them, how many do they collect each? So I set their pine cones to the answer. And now I need to calculate the total amount. So a couple of ways you could do this. But we want to set our total to be, and in here we need to put an equation. So we want to add my amount with their amount. And their amount is going to be how many of them there are, 4, multiplied by how many they each collected, because they all collected the same amount. So I need to have multiplication to work out how many they got, and what I multiply here is how many friends there are times their pine cones, how many they collected. So that'll give me their total, but I need to know the total by adding mine to it as well, adding my 8. So I need to add your pine cones to this. So we need also an add operator. And I want to add to their total, I want to add then your pine cones, how many you collected. And that's the equation we would need for this. Set the total to that. And if we want to say the total is something, we need to join the total is, and then what we put in here is the total, the variable total. Okay, so now I've got 8 pine cones. I've got 4 friends. They all collected the same amount, which we'll ask them. We collect the total. We calculate the total, sorry, by doing the number of friends times how many pine cones they got. We add our pine cones to that, and then we say the total. So how many did your friends collect each? So say they all collected 6. And the total is 32. It's 6 times 4, okay, which is 24, plus 8 that I had is 32. If I have 0 friends, how many would this give me? If I don't have any friends, so they didn't collect anything, how many would I have? No matter what number I put in here, because I have 0 friends, the only amount of pinecones I've got is 8. It's what I collected. If I have 1 friend, and my friend collects 4, how many pinecones will I have then? So 1 friend times 4 gives me 4, plus how many I got? 8 gives me 12. Okay, and that's how you do the challenge task. So these tasks are quite tricky, but hopefully it's given you a nice introduction to how variables work, because you can use these in your programs or in your games to make them much more useful. You could have a score system, you could have a high score system, a timer. It makes your games much more interesting and just fun. Okay, so in the next video, I think we're looking at how to make decisions, how to use if statements, so that the game decides whether to do one thing or do a different thing instead. Okay, so join me for the next video.